before our wedding, a man I had never seen before showed up at my job and said, "Your fiancé offered you as payment for his debt." I met Crispin when I was 23, and he was 27, and he had the kind of confidence that made you feel safe before you realized it was the same kind con men use. He worked at a car dealership, and his job didn't pay the kind of money he spent. He took me to nice restaurants and bought me jewelry on random Tuesdays, and when I asked how he afforded it, he said he was good with money and had been saving for years before he met me. I believed him because I was in love, and questioning a man who treats you well feels ungrateful when you don't know any better. 2 years in, he proposed on my 25th birthday, with a ring bigger than anything I would have picked for myself. I said yes, and we set the date 6 months out because Crispin said he didn't want to wait. He said he had waited his whole life for someone like me. I thought it was romantic. I planned the wedding mostly alone because Crispin said he trusted my taste and just wanted to show up and marry me. He gave me a budget of $15,000 from a savings account he said he'd set aside, and I didn't ask to see the account. I booked vendors, I picked flowers, I ordered invitations with our names pressed in gold on white cardstock. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was at my desk at the insurance office where I worked as a claims processor when a man walked in and asked for me by name. He wasn't a client. He didn't have paperwork. He wore an expensive watch and a leather jacket, and he sat down across from me and looked me over from my face to the ring on my finger and said, "So you're what he's offering." I asked him what he meant and who he was. He told me his name was Bonner and that Crispin owed him over $90,000 going back 3 years. He said Crispin had stopped paying 8 months ago, right around the time he proposed to me. 6 weeks ago, Bonner said. Crispin had come to him with a different kind of offer. Me, not my money. Me. Once we were married, Bonner could have access to me whenever he wanted until the debt was considered paid. Bonner said Crispin had described me. He had listed my measurements. He had listed my age. He had used the words cooperative and trusting. He had talked about me the way a man talks about a product he is handing over to settle an invoice. Bonner said Crispin's plan was to ease me in after the wedding. Friend first, then business partner, then favors that got bigger and more personal until I was too married and too ashamed to tell anyone. He said the deal was disgusting even by his standards, and he had done a lot of ugly things in his life, but he wasn't going to be part of this one. He stood up and put a card on my desk with his number on it and said if I didn't believe him, I could ask Crispin about the money and watch how he reacted. Then he left. I sat there 45 minutes without moving while the phones rang behind me and clients walked through the door. I picked up the card 3 different times and put it back down again. I read his number until I had it memorized without meaning to. The receptionist asked if I was okay, and I said yes and went back to staring at my screen. I went home that night and Crispin was on the couch watching a game and asked what was for dinner. I asked him who Bonner was. His face didn't fall. It froze. I watched every muscle in his jaw tighten, and I knew Bonner had told the truth, but I needed to hear the lies counted out loud. I sat down across from him and asked again, slower, "Who is Bonner?" Crispin blinked, and then something clicked behind his eyes like he had found the gear he was looking for. He leaned back into the couch. "Bonner? I don't know any Bonner. Where did you hear that name?" His voice was steady, but his fingers were dug into the cushion so hard the fabric was pulling. I told him everything Bonner told me, piece by piece, like a list. The 90,000. His left eye twitched. The 3 years of borrowing. His throat moved like he had swallowed something dry. The payment stopping 8 months ago, right around the proposal. He didn't interrupt. He sat there using the time to figure out which lie to try next. Then he laughed, not a nervous laugh, a big, full laugh. He stood up and walked toward me with his hands out. "Baby, some random guy walks into your office and tells you a story and you just believe him over me?" He told me Bonner was a scam artist. He said guys like Bonner targeted women before weddings because that was when people were the most emotional. His voice was warm and reasonable, and he put his hand on my cheek, and for one weak moment I almost believed him. I wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. Then I remembered. Bonner knew my measurements. He knew my age. He used the exact words cooperative and trusting. A scam artist who walked into insurance offices wouldn't know what size clothes I wear. He wouldn't know my personality. He wouldn't know the exact words Crispin used about me to other people. I pulled back from his hand. He knew things only you would know. He described me the way you described me to him. The warmth dropped from Crispin's face like a light switching off. His voice went hard, like metal. "So you're going to throw away everything we built because some guy said some stuff?" His arms crossed, and I noticed something that hit me like cold water. He wasn't denying it anymore. He wasn't saying Bonner was lying. He wasn't saying the debt wasn't real. He was saying I should choose him over the truth. He was defending his plan, not his innocence. I told him I was sleeping in the guest room. He opened his mouth to argue, and I was already walking down the hall. I locked the door behind me and listened to him pace. I wasn't planning to talk in the morning. I was planning to search. Whatever he had been hiding for 3 years was somewhere in this apartment, and I was going to find every piece of it before he could delete it. At 2 in the morning, I heard him snoring through the wall, and I unlocked the door as slowly as I could, holding the handle so the latch wouldn't click, and walked into the dining area where his phone was charging on the counter like it did every single night. His passcode was my birthday. I had not appreciated until that moment what it meant for a man to use the date he was supposed to celebrate as the key to the things he hid from me. I searched Bonner's name, and dozens of threads came up going back 3 years. Amounts, dates, promises to pay, excuses for late payments, threats from Bonner when the money didn't come, apologies from Crispin when it did. The whole paper trail of a man drowning in his own mess. The conversation from 6 weeks ago was longer than the others. It started with Crispin telling Bonner he had a different kind of offer and asking to meet in person. Bonner told him to put it in writing, and Crispin did. He listed my age. He listed what I looked like. He used the word compliant. He said I was easy to manage. He said I trusted him completely, and that once we were married, I would go along with whatever he told me, because that was just the kind of person I was. He described my body the way you'd describe something you were selling online. He didn't sound ashamed. He sounded proud, like he had found a solution nobody else would have thought of. I started taking screenshots in the dark with the fridge humming behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I kept hitting the wrong buttons. I sent every image to my own phone, deleted them from his sent folder, and made sure my number wasn't anywhere in his recent activity. Then I found the message from 5 weeks ago. She won't be a problem. She does what I tell her. She thinks I hung the moon. I read it 3 times. That was me. That was how the man I was going to marry in 2 weeks talked about me me when I wasn't in the room. Not like a partner, not like a person. Like a thing that wouldn't cause trouble during the transaction. It felt like swallowing glass. Underneath the pain, something else was building. Something hot and quiet and clear. I opened his email and pulled up his bank statements. His checking had $400. Savings, $82. The savings account he had told me about, the one with the $15,000 for the wedding budget, didn't exist. The $15,000 had come from Bonner. 5 months ago, Crispin had asked him for a loan, called it setup costs, and Bonner approved it. The money I used to book the florist and the photographer and the venue had all come from the man Crispin was planning to hand me to. The flowers, the invitations with our names in gold, all of it. I put the phone back exactly where it was, walked into the bathroom, turned on the fan, and called Sushma. I told her everything. The visit, the confrontation, the messages, the bank statements, the way he had described me like an item on a menu, the line about how I wouldn't be a problem. She said, come tonight. I said no. If I left now, Crispin would start covering tracks. I needed one more day to cancel vendors and untangle my name from his. She said she would pick me up tomorrow at 5, pack a bag and leave it in your car. Smile and nod for one more day. I told her okay. I went back to the guest room and lay there in the dark, listening to Crispin snore, 10 feet away, peaceful, while I thought about how the man I was supposed to marry in 2 weeks had decided I was worth $90,000. The next morning, I made coffee and sat across from him and smiled and said good morning. He kissed my forehead and said, see, everything's fine. We just had a rough night. I nodded and said, you're right. Underneath the table, my phone had every screenshot backed up to the cloud. I had 8 hours to dismantle 2 years of lies. I got to the office early and started calling. The florist was first. She let me out with no penalty since the flowers hadn't been ordered from her supplier yet. I thanked her and crossed her off the list. The photographer was next. He had blocked the date and turned down 2 other bookings for that Saturday. He could refund half. I said that was fair even though nothing about any of this was fair. The venue was the one. The reception hall had been the most expensive part of the budget, and the woman on the phone read the contract back to me in a flat voice like she did this 10 times a week. $3,000 to cancel within 30 days. No exceptions. I asked if there was any way around it. A partial refund, a hardship clause. She said no. The contract was clear. $3,000 or the reservation stays active. I sat at my desk staring at the wall doing the math I already knew the answer to. I didn't have $3,000. The money I had used to book it was Bonner's. If I couldn't kill the reservation, Crispin would use it as proof the wedding was still on. He could tell people I was just getting cold feet. He could keep the lie alive in everyone's heads after I was gone. And I thought about putting the $3,000 on a credit card I couldn't pay off. I thought about asking my mother for the money and trying to explain why. I thought about a lot of things in the span of about 90 seconds, and none of them worked. I was still staring at the wall when my phone buzzed. Crispin. My mom wants to come to dinner tonight to go over final wedding stuff. I already told her yes. Sloan. The woman who'd spent 2 years treating me like a temporary problem her son would eventually outgrow. Sloan had opinions about everything. The flowers, the guest list, the dress, the food, and she shared all of them whether you asked or not. If she was at our table going over seating charts, I couldn't pack. I couldn't leave. I texted back something normal and tried to think. At lunch, I sat in my car in the parking lot with the doors locked and called Bonner. He picked up on the first ring like he had been waiting. I told him I had read the messages. I knew about the $15,000. I was leaving Crispin. He was quiet for a few seconds, and then he said something I didn't expect. He called me this morning, early. Said you brought up my name last night and that he handled it. Said you were upset, but he talked you down. He asked me to wait until after the wedding. I sat very still. While I had been smiling at Crispin and saying you're right and letting him kiss my forehead, he had picked up his phone and confirmed I was still part of the payment. He was still selling me, right now, today, while I made him coffee. Bonner kept talking. I'll be honest with you. I'm not doing this out of kindness. If this deal goes through, I'm the one who looks like a monster. Crispin put me in a position where I either go along with it or I blow it up. I chose to blow it up. I respected the honesty more than I would have respected a lie. At least he told me the truth about why he was telling me the truth. I asked him if he would say it to Crispin's face, in person, in front of me, tell him the deal was off. Bonner said name the time. Something settled in me. I wasn't going to sneak out at 5 and let Crispin spin the story. Sloan wanted to come to dinner? Fine. Let her come. Let Crispin pour wine and talk about the honeymoon. I would invite Bonner too. I told Bonner to be at the apartment at 7:15. Sloan was coming at 7. Just enough time for Crispin to feel safe. Just enough time for the door to ring one more time and for everything to change. I texted Sushma. Change of plans. We're having a dinner party. Park 2 blocks from the apartment and wait for me after dinner. Keep my bag in your trunk. She sent question marks and I said I would explain later. I went back to my desk and processed claims like it was any other Tuesday. It wasn't. I left work at 4:30. Crispin was already home setting out plates like he was hosting a normal family dinner. He looked up and said, you look nice today. I said I wanted to look good for tonight. He had no idea what tonight actually was. Sloan showed up at 7 on the dot because that woman had never been late to anything in her life. She was carrying a bottle of wine and a thick binder with color-coded tabs, and she gave me her usual smile that started and stopped at her mouth and never made it up to her eyes. I hope you've kept up with the seating chart, she said, opening the wine like she already lived here. Last time I looked it was a mess. I smiled back. Don't worry about the seating chart. There's been a change in plans. Sloan raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She sat down and placed the binder in front of her like a shield. Crispin glanced at me from across the room. I gave him nothing. He looked away first. He always looked away first when he didn't know what I was thinking. He poured wine and started talking about the honeymoon, the resort, the private beach, the balcony that looked out over the water. Sloan nodded along about how lovely it sounded and how Crispin always did have good taste. They were performing for each other, mother and son, doing the thing they did best, which was pretend everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. I sat with my wine glass and didn't drink and watched the whole thing like I was outside my own body, like I was sitting in a theater watching 2 actors run a scene that had nothing to do with real life. Every word Crispin said about the honeymoon, about our future, landed on me like something dead and hollow, because I knew what was underneath it. I knew what he had said to Bonner this morning. I knew what he had written 6 weeks ago. The honeymoon was probably booked with borrowed money too. The whole thing was just another layer of the same lie dressed up in resort brochures and ocean views. Then the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the room. Crispin stopped stopped mid-sentence and looked toward the door. Who's that? I didn't invite anyone. I stood up. I did. I opened the door and Bonner was standing there in the same leather jacket he had on when he walked into my office. He nodded once and stepped inside. Crispin saw him and went rigid. The wine glass in his hand tilted and a thin line of red ran down the stem onto his fingers, and he didn't notice. Sloane's face tightened the way it always did when something happened she hadn't planned for, which was the thing Sloane hated more than anything. Who is this? Crispin didn't answer. He didn't move. Bonner walked past me, pulled out the empty chair across from Sloane, sat down and said, I'm the man your son owes $90,000 to. The room went quiet enough to hear wine drip onto the floor. Sloane looked at Crispin. What is he talking about? Crispin set the glass down hard. This is not what it looks like. He's lying. He's a con artist. His hand was shaking. His voice was climbing. Bonner didn't flinch. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and slid it face up across the table to Sloane. Read the third message from the top. That's where your son describes his fiancé's body and offers her to me as payment. Sloane picked up the phone. I watched her eyes move left to right twice, and the color drained from her face. She set the phone down carefully, the way you set down something that burned you. Crispin lunged across the table for it, and Bonner's hand was faster, sliding the phone back into his jacket. Crispin turned to me. His eyes were red and wet. Why are you doing this? I was going to fix it. I was going to pay him back. You didn't have to bring him here. You described my measurements to a stranger and called me cooperative. You weren't going to fix anything. You were going to use me until the debt was paid. That's not a marriage. That's trafficking. The word landed heavy in the room. Sloane put her hand flat on the table and looked at her son. Is this true? Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something breaks. Crispin looked at his mother. He looked at Bonner. He looked at me. He didn't say a word. His silence filled the apartment. Then he dropped to his knees on the dining room floor and grabbed both my hands. I love you. I made a mistake. I was desperate and stupid. I never would have let him touch you. I would have found another way. Please, don't throw us away over this. His voice cracked on please. His tears looked real. For 1 second I felt the pull again. The same pull that had kept me blind for 2 years. The same pull that had made me believe the savings account was real and the budget was clean. And then I remembered the words. She won't be a problem. She does what I tell her. I slid my hands out of his slowly, finger by finger. You didn't make a mistake, Crispin. You made a plan. You budgeted me. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did was decide I was worth less than what you owed. His face crumbled. He looked at Sloane the way a kid looks at a parent in trouble, hoping someone would step in. She didn't lift her head. She didn't meet his eyes. Then he stood up fast, almost stumbling, and grabbed his phone off the table and dialed Bonner's number. Bonner's phone buzzed against the wood. The sound of it vibrating in that silent room almost sounded like a joke. Crispin pressed his to his ear. Answer it. Tell her the deal is off. Tell her I called it off. Tell her I changed my mind. His voice was wild and high. Bonner didn't move. I'm not your alibi, kid. You called me this morning and told me the deal was still on. You said you handled her. Those are your words. The buzzing stopped as the call rolled to voicemail. Crispin's arm dropped. Sloane pushed her chair back. The scrape cut through the room. She stood up and picked up her binder and held it against her chest like she was carrying something heavy. I raised you better than this, she said. Or at least I thought I did. Crispin flinched like she had hit him. She turned to me. Her face was different. The stiffness was still there, but something behind it had changed. And for the first time in 2 years of knowing this woman, she said something to me without judgment in her voice. I'm sorry. You deserve better than my son. She walked to the door and opened it and walked through it without looking back. The click of it closing sounded final in a way nothing else that night had. Bonner stood, pulled his jacket flat with both hands, and pushed his chair in, which was such a strangely polite thing to do in the middle of all this that it almost made me blink. He looked at Crispin. You still owe me $90,000, and now you don't have a wife to trade. Figure it out. He nodded at me on the way out. The door shut behind him, and then it was just the two of us, me and Crispin, in a dining room with plates of food nobody had eaten, and an empty chair where his mother had been sitting, and another empty chair where the man he owed $90,000 to had been sitting. The apartment was quiet enough to hear my own breathing. Crispin turned to me one last time, his eyes gone hard underneath the tears. You're going to regret this. You're never going to find someone who treats you the way I did. I almost laughed. That's the first honest thing you've said. I hope I never find someone who treats me the way you did. I pulled the ring off my finger and set it on the table between the cold plates and the open bottle and the binder Sloane had left behind. I picked up my keys. I didn't look at him again. I walked out, down the stairs, through the lobby, into the parking lot. Sushma was where she said she'd be. 2 blocks down, engine running, headlights on. I got in. The seat was warm. You okay? No, but I will be. She put the car in drive. The apartment building got smaller in the side mirror, the windows shrinking to squares of light, and then it was just skyline. The invitations stayed in their box. The ring stayed on the table. The wedding never happened.